I'm Robin Hoffman. I'm a public artist here in Charlottesville. And some people want to know, what's a public artist? Well, a public artist can be somebody who just like lands up getting a commission to do one of the buses here in Charlottesville. Now, the Bridge Progressive Arts is a art structure that enables nonprofit and Virginia Commission from Richmond to provide grants for paying the artists to do designs and that sort of thing. And they're asking me to do a bus design. And I thought, well, what, you know, first of all, an artist, public artists especially, you know, we have to look at individual nuances to get to an idea. Just like some of the famous park designers, they're architect landscapers. So I was thinking, like, what is McIntyre Park, you know, because that's on my bus line. And that's the bus line that's going to go to McIntyre Park, and I'm a landscape painter. Maybe I'll do, you know, McIntyre Park. So then I said, okay, I need to know about the history of McIntyre Park to give me some ideas. Like, where should I concentrate and that sort of thing. And then I thought, when I looked at the history, I was like, oh my goodness, you know, there seems to be, you know, a person way back in 1925 who was very rich, and he just gave all this land to UVA and to McIntyre Park, which they named after him, Paul McIntyre. And then at the time, there was a lot of tension because that was the time when, right after 1850. 1850 was the Civil War. And the Civil War, of course, was all throughout the states. Where I grew up, in Brooklyn, there was Prospect Park, built at the same time. So I kind of looked at that, like what did the architect landscape think about when he was doing McIntyre Park, and how did the Brooklyn people approach their park? And it was very interesting. But that's what happens, you know, is that people need to feed their brains to figure out, you know, how they're going to approach something if they're going to then create something. When I create something, so I'm gonna take out my paints, and I'm gonna put my hat on, and you know why an artist wears a hat? An artist wears a hat because it keeps the light, you know, so you can focus, so it's not a glare. So that's why I put my hat on. And then also I work with recycled or repurposed materials. So this came out of a dumpster. This was used for lining a drawer or whatever. But also I used it for my Rivanna River boat sign. I was in a canoe doing a demonstration how to paint on the river. So I'm gonna do that. And then I have to take out my easel and oh, what a surprise.
Hey, how are you?
This is so fun. I'm in McIntyre Park. Now, you just happened to be walking in McIntyre Park. Did you get here by bus?
I walked. I parked nearby and walked here. Okay.
And so, well, so nice to, would you mind if I paint while we...
Sure.
You stand here? I mean, it's like, it's such a surprise. Well, so I basically have been painting since I'm 7 years old, and I usually like to be outside, but I also do portraiture. And then after I paint outside, I do abstract painting, which is different in a sense, but not really, of the type of visual forms that I see in nature. Like nature has all these negative and positive forms and things like that. And when you're standing outside, you study them. And so,
would you do an abstract one for the bus?
I might.
I think that would be interesting.
So, you know, that's a very good question, because what happens a lot of times is I will structure my painting after I've studied the situation, because of my memory of certain forms, just like you said. So studying is definitely a part of how you reference things and as a painter. And then what do you do in Charlottesville?
Well,
like in terms of creativity, do you think that you have something here that helps you like with working with people or whatever it is to actually come up? Oh, okay.
I do a lot of photography, and I especially like photography that's, maybe you could describe it as abstract, but sort of more about like the composition and shapes and colors and all that, how work together, more than just like taking a picture of something that happened.
And so, so just being in Charlottesville now for me for 13 years. How long have you been in Charlottesville?
Well, I guess I grew up in Albemarle County, right outside of Charlottesville, and I've been within the city limits itself for about 3 years.
Okay, and so you wouldn't consider, I'm sorry if I ask you this question, but you wouldn't consider Albemarle County Charlottesville?
I always have, you know, growing up, if anyone asked, I'd say I'm from Charlottesville, and it was sort of always like my city.
Uh-huh. I'm sorry, I'm having problems with my easel. I'm not just trying to get this, what happened is that when you carry your easel a lot outside, all the parts will break when they fall. And so, but you know, this is the benefit also of working in the public art, is that you have to sort of tweak, and you have to sort of you have to do things for the social awareness a lot of times. If I'm getting commissioned for a bus, I'm not going to just make flowers. Well, I could, and that might be wonderful for design and for people who are traveling on the bus route. But if they asked me personally, I like to do things to benefit the public, like almost like a message. And so I kind of do that. Sorry, I'm having challenges, which
you have to struggle for art.
You have to struggle. No, I know this thing is kind of like a Chinese puzzle at times, and all of a sudden, of course, when I'm trying to open it up, it's acting like that. Now, wait, I have to stop thinking and just do it. All right, here we go. Do you sometimes have that, like when you overthink things?
All the time.
All the time. It just takes, there it is. All right, so anyway, so you think things a lot because of different ideas that approach you or whatever. Like for instance, I'm thinking right now about, you know, what we're doing here in the park. And what I realized, like just researching what McIntyre Park does, we have Parks and Recreation doing a lot of initiatives right now so that everybody can have, you know, a place to not only enjoy just the nature, but also be able to, what do you know about what they're doing now recently? Do you have any ideas?
Well, I know in McIntyre that there's a group working on the botanical gardens there, and they have a lot of big plans to have a pavilion, a concert space, you know, an area for people to walk. So that coming together will be pretty exciting.
Okay, so so I'm gonna assume that like Brian Daly, Parks and Rec, and everybody, Katie Elliott. Oh, wait, who's the one who does the Kathy Elliott? There's a whole bunch of people that do what I'm doing right now, but big time. So they're really trying to get everybody's input. For instance, Sean Tubbs. I'm using him as a reference. He did a big article on a study he did for traveling by bus for like a year now. And he came from McIntyre. He came from near Woolen Mills. So that's how I got here today. I got here because I was able to use his route. And he also timed it, like how many minutes it took and that sort of thing.
How long did it take today?
Today it took a little bit more than a half hour, I think. But I just left in time, so I didn't really pay attention that much, but it wasn't bad. And then what I want to say is, finally, we want to realize also his study is the climate, that he said a big percentage, like a third of why we have sickness and cancer and asthma and things like that was because of the fossil fuel discharge, the gases that come from the cars. Plus, it makes it very hot in the atmosphere and that sort of thing. Okay, so I'm going to mix some paints. And so, but what I want to ask you, by the way, as long as you're here watching me, you don't mind if I paint, right?
Sure.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Cool. So, I use blue colors that are what they call primary. There's no other paint mixed in with this, so that's why they call it primary. So blue paints, and then I use red, which is really like a rich tone red. They call this alizarin crimson, but it's the truest red. It doesn't.
It's like
look,
ketchup.
That's a little orangey, I think. Yeah, it is a little orangey, but anyway, it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be. And then here is a really primary color, yellow. And then I just put a little bit of white on the side because some of the colors, when I mix them, they seem to need a little white.
When did you first start getting interested in painting?
So, that's a good question. When I was just 7 years old, my mother's a fine art painter and sculptor, and a teacher, and a college and all that sort of stuff. But then she had 2 schools. But in the summertime, she would take us to Vermont. We had a summer home in Vermont. We lived in New York, and then she would take us to Vermont so that we could paint. So can you imagine little me? No, I don't think you can. But anyway, I was little, like 7 years old, and I was standing next to her and studying nature. So that's a good question because, over time, I'm not saying which decade, but it's a long time. A lot of changes have occurred, and it's a good thing, don't you think? That you realize that we could actually return to a cleaner environment with doing some of the new industrial green initiatives. For instance, do you know anything about some of those initiatives that are going on? Some industries that are going on in Charlottesville to keep us from being polluted and wasting? Yeah. And the wasting thing, do you know about those things?
Yeah, I mean, I know the city recently established a greenhouse gas emissions reduction target goal of carbon neutrality by 2050, which a lot of organizations are really looking at, how can we really meet that goal, especially, as you mentioned, about 20% or so of our emissions come from transportation, about a third from residential, a third from business. So I know folks with the Charlottesville Climate Collaborative have a residential program where they work with families to see if they can get them to install insulation, install smart thermostats, and just a bunch of small changes that all together really help reduce our emissions.
How did we pay for that? like how does C3 and all these wonderful people, really, these are people that just decided they are going to do something, right?
Yeah.
And they're like smart that they're using all their education to figure out how 196,000 people can ride around in a small area of Charlottesville without cars and that
Right.
sort of thing. But also because we have challenges with healthcare going up and healthcare and utilities and all sorts of expenses, we can't even pay for our rents. We need to be,
Yeah.
So one of the things you can do, like they can do, is get us to use less energy.
Yeah, which saves, you know, especially a lot of older homes in Charlottesville have really outdated insulation and drives up people's energy bills in the winter extremely high, and is a huge part of why people find it hard to afford to live in Charlottesville. So just small things like green retrofitting can actually make homes more affordable for people. And you mentioned Sean Tubbs and riding the buses. The bus is an affordable housing issue as well, because the cost, if you build an apartment complex and you build parking spaces with it, each parking space costs a developer in Charlottesville over $30,000 per unit. So that really drives up rents. And right now we have these parking requirements that say that when a developer builds an apartment or a building, they must build this number of parking spaces, even if they think their tenants want to bike to work or walk or ride the bus. And so it takes up our land that we could be using for parks, trees, housing, rather than just parking spaces.
So, like I said before, kind of was alluding to the fact that, like, when I started doing this bus design, I had to look at history. You know what I'm saying? Like, how did we get from here, from there? And that also enabled me to decide, like, what it was that Charlottesville was about and what Charlottesville could be.
Yeah, and it feels like so much of the conversation around our bus system has really become one of the main conversations in the city, and you know, especially in the city council election, which I think is a unique moment. And it's so much about the bus is sort of about the future of our city and what kind of future we want to see. If we want to have, you know, more walkability and bikeability, or do we want more urban sprawl? Are we going to be able to handle development growth and population growth? And the bus just ties into so many of these conversations.
Well, I am painting where we're sort of standing, but also as I'm painting, I'm choosing my subject. Even though it seems like this is the subject, the whole park, I'm deciding what my position will be on my canvas. So that takes a little bit of experience, but also it enables me to paint and not just copy. So what do I mean? So what I mean is, like, when you come up with a plan for a city, for instance, if you have done the research of possibilities, you're not just gonna, you know, like some people may just like take a position, not do any research, and get us all into a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
Right? Because they might go, for instance, to a different country, do a trade or something like that, and not know that that country, you know, may harm us, you know, unless they did some research. So, you know, and that's the thing I think people need to realize too, that once we elect an official, right, we want to make sure, you know, that we vote carefully, that official, for instance, is going to do the research. Like, are they just talking about how they wish things were, or are they talking about how things could be, and then like you know, like me, making this, you know, possible mural for a bus or whatever it's called, right? Now, how do I know, you know, what I'm going to do is I have to do research before I do it. Now, I'm not going to make this whole big bus a mistake, you know, right?
So how does that work? Do you submit a design to the city and then they print it on the buses, or?
Okay, so we have an organization called Bridge Progressive Arts.
Right.
And they have organized it so they work with us, Richmond. Richmond is a commission that works from the government, to some degree taxpayers, but mostly grants. People who are rich, who love the idea of people being creative, because it's very important to have, creative people.
Right.
If you don't have creative people, and we don't have any cultural ideas from different places, what's going to happen is we're going to have ham and cheese and white bread, and that's it, with a little mustard for sandwiches, right? What do you eat? What do you love to eat?
Me?
Yes. Like, do you eat anything?
No. No. I don't know. Especially campaigning, I have so little time being around that I don't put as much time into meal prep, as I'd like. So I usually eat pretty basic, like some crock pot meals prepared. I'll try and eat fruits and vegetables and stay healthy while campaigning. I think it's, especially when you're so busy, it's important to pay attention to your diet and make sure you're not just eating, junk food, which is easy when you're, spending 12 hours a day doing stuff.
So do you have any dietary restrictions? Because you're very young. Your bowel is fine. like me,
not really,
I
I'm pretty good.
I can't eat bread anymore. I can't eat sugar anymore, not because I just don't feel good when I eat it, right? So, but also people are looking at organic food, and then we have gardens here. That's also part of Parks and Rec, which Parks and Rec is huge in the city. They have so much responsibility to our well-being and our health.
Yeah, and they, not just the parks, but they deal with our aquatic centers at Washington Park and near Buford and other areas. And you mentioned gardens. I know we have our community gardens in Charlottesville, which we just won a grant from the federal government, from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, where the work that the Food Justice Network is doing with Chantel Bingham and others is really exciting work of trying to create local fresh produce that's accessible to everyone, and dealing with this issue of food equity, where depending on where you live or how much money you make, your ability to access fresh, healthy produce really varies. So they found that 16.7% of the city are food insecure, and a lot of people in the city don't have access to or can't afford healthy foods.
I want to tell you a short story real quick, because I broke my ankle. People don't realize, and I'm one of them, you become so quickly infirm, and for 5 months I was out of work. I was in a wheelchair for a while. So the idea is that you never know, right? So first of all, what do you have to have? Like, you have to have some kind of money in the bank. You can't have money in the bank if you're spending it all on healthcare, right?
Right.
You can't have money in the bank if you're spending it on college and housing and so forth and so on. But anyway, we're almost finished with this painting, believe it or not.
Do you ever go into a painting thinking there's a specific emotion you want to convey, or what inspires you when you're doing a painting?
You. Seriously. I get very excited that I'm raising money for scholarships for people to be able to do TV shows on my show, that everybody who comes here is also willing to partake in that sort of thing. And I usually just have guests that are, helping everybody else, which we have to do, whether if you're religious or if you're in a community or whatever. But, so I'm finished, and so I'm just gonna sign my name. That's what I do. And today is the 19th year. So, and then we're gonna auction these paintings off.
Awesome.
When we want to raise some more money. But I want to thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
For
it's good
being
to
here.
Run into you at the park.
Yes, and also I wish you well. And you're a young man, but you're brilliant. I know. I've listened to a lot of your speeches,
Thank you.
And I have to say that you are well educated. We need that because you don't want to make mistakes, right?
Yeah. Well, I'll just end saying, you know, change is never about electing one person or one candidate. It's all about the community. So as a community, we just need to continue to work together and create change and make this the city we know it can be.
So thank you so much. And now we have to run out of the park, so go.